This next segment is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy, the world's largest online therapy service. You've heard of them. They sponsor the show. BetterHelp wants me to give you the following trigger warning. Depression and suicide are discussed in this question. All right, Gabe, let's dive in.
Hey, Jordan and Gabe. 6 years ago, I suffered from postpartum depression and anxiety after the birth of my son. It was a really awful and dark place to be. I felt like a ton of bricks laying on my chest. I didn't feel worthy of being my son's mom, and I was suicidal. I had never experienced anything like it before. I opened up to my husband about all of this at the time, but I was met with crickets. He did nothing to help me. I had to look for services myself and thankfully found something in my local area. All these years later, I'm still hurt by my husband. He's apologized to me, but I don't know how to get over it. I had a great friend pass away from suicide before my son was born, and I would do anything for a friend or a family member who said they were suicidal. So I'm struggling to understand why he did nothing to help me when I needed him the most. How do I move past this? Signed, Parting Ways with these postpartum pangs.
Oh, man. Well, first of all, I am so sorry that you went through such a dark time in your life after you had your son. I understand postpartum depression can be extremely difficult. It can be isolating. And I'm sorry that your husband wasn't there for you the way that you needed him to be. I can hear how hard all of this has been for you, and I appreciate why you still feel hurt by it. Although I have to say, the fact that you found your own resources and you made it through that chapter, I think that's really remarkable. That takes a lot of strength and resourcefulness, and I'm glad that you're feeling better these days. Since BetterHelp was kind enough to sponsor this question, we spoke with Haesue Jo, licensed marriage and family therapist and head of clinical operations at BetterHelp. The first thing that Haesue shared with us is that postpartum depression, most people don't know anything about it. It can be really hard for many folks to even understand. As she pointed out, it's not like we learn about postpartum in school or in the media or even from our own mothers, especially men, I would add. Most people in our society just don't talk much about the incredibly difficult stuff that happens after a woman has a child. Some new mothers become suicidal. Some have intrusive thoughts of killing their own child. It can get really intense, but we don't really like to talk about that because it's taboo. Plus, there's this beauty of a new life, and the baby's so cute, and oftentimes the mother's state just gets lost in the shuffle. None of that, by the way, is an excuse for your husband not being there for you, especially because you told him point blank how you were feeling. But it might shed some light on why it was hard for your husband to understand you or to know how to respond. He's not the one writing in, of course, but for what it's worth, Haesue's hypothesis was that he probably just didn't know how to support you, so he shut down and withdrew, which a lot of people do, by the way. It's possible that he was even afraid of making things worse. As Haesue pointed out, there's a common misconception that if you talk about suicide with a suicidal person, you're somehow going to make them more suicidal. This is a myth. Maybe your husband saw how bleak things were for you and thought, oh gosh, well, if I talk about it, I'm going to make her more suicidal and then she's going to do it. So I'm just going to not talk about it at all. People who aren't trained in this stuff the way therapists are, they tend to be pretty nervous about having that conversation. And that's understandable. Still, none of that changes the fact that your husband should have been there for you. So how do you move on from this? Well, Haesue's take, and I think she's right, is that you probably won't be able to do that without your husband's involvement in some way, because there's clearly some harbored resentment here. There's a wound, the memory of that dark time and how your husband left you alone with it. So if you want to move on, you're going to have to heal that wound. And healing that wound means talking about it, processing the feelings, communicating with your husband about what you needed, what you didn't get, and how that's making you feel about him in the marriage now, which, by the way, he might still not fully appreciate because sometimes, us guys be dense. Haesue's advice, in situations like this, it's always a good idea to consider couples therapy. It sounds like you guys could really use a space with a professional to facilitate the communication that has not been happening these past few years, and to figure out how you guys will handle challenges like this in the future. Because I wonder if that might be part of what's eating away at you now, not knowing whether you can truly rely on your husband from here on out. Haesue picked up on that in your letter too. This sense that you might need some reassurance that he'll be there for you if things ever get tough again in the future. There's the injury from 6 years ago, but then there might be this fear or anxiety now that he'll withdraw if another crisis comes along. Like, can I trust you to take care of our family? Can I depend on you to be there for me, for our kids? Another good reason, in Haesue's opinion, to explore all of that in a supportive, controlled space like therapy.
So true. Therapy would be a wonderful place for them right now. But whether you talk this out in a therapist's office or you guys just talk it out alone in your living room, you guys definitely need to open up. As Haesue said to us, it sounds like you have a lot to get off your chest. There are thoughts and feelings in this marriage that are largely going unsaid from the sound of it. And then there are the ripple effects of that earlier abandonment, the breakdown in communication, these residual feelings of being hurt, of being misunderstood, being alone with all of this, the effect all of that has had on the relationship. So I would make a real effort to bring that into the light. Invite your husband to listen to you, help him really understand what all of this has been like for you. He might need to be told very directly how painful that period was to finally appreciate what you went through and hopefully recognize how he should have shown up back then. And as you do that, I would also invite him to open up. What was that chapter like for him? What feelings did that crisis bring up on his side of the equation? Which topics or challenges made him panic and withdraw? Again, not because that lets him off the hook necessarily, but because you two need to really understand each other and recognize each other. This is the nuts and bolts of repairing the line of communication that's been broken. The more you guys can talk and open up and identify with each other's feelings, hopefully get to the root causes of this dynamic, the better your chances will be of resolving the wound and rebuilding the trust and coming back together. And that might take some time. It might be a bit painful in the short term as well, although I think that that's probably a sign that you guys are on the right track.
Totally agree. This is a rift between them, but it's also an opportunity to understand each other and find a new way of talking and hopefully create a new and maybe even a deeper bond. So that's our advice. You want to move on, but it's not really the right approach. It's more like moving through. And moving through means processing this chapter. I know you want the resentment and the sadness to just disappear, but as Haesue explained it to us, those feelings probably won't just go away on their own, but they can resolve, they can evolve if you talk about them openly with your husband and he's willing to do the same. So I really hope you guys get to do that. We're sending you good thoughts. We're wishing you and your family the best. And special thanks to Haesue Jo and BetterHelp Online Therapy. BetterHelp.com/Jordan will help support the show and get you started. You can reach us Friday at jordanharbinger.com. Please keep your emails concise. Try to use a descriptive subject line that makes our job a lot easier. If there's something you're going through, any big decision you're wrestling with, or you want a new perspective on anything like life, love, work, what to do if your roommate turns out to be a paranoid schizophrenic in the grip of florid psychosis, whatever's got you staying up at night lately, hit us up Friday at jordanharbinger.com. We're here to help, and we keep every email anonymous. Our advice and opinions are our own, and I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. Do your own research before implementing anything you hear on the show. Haesue Jo's input is general psychological information based on research and clinical experience. It's intended to be general and informational in nature, does not represent or indicate an established clinical or professional relationship with those inquiring for guidance. Haesue's feedback is in response to a written question, and therefore there are likely other unknown considerations given the limited context. Also, just because you might hear something on the show that sounds similar to what you're experiencing, beware of self-diagnosis. Diagnosis is not required to find relief, and you'll want to find a qualified professional to assess and explore diagnoses if that's important to you. If you or your partner are in crisis and uncertain how to handle postpartum depression or something outside of that issue, reach out for support. Crisis hotlines and local authorities. Have a safety plan. That can be done with a therapist, too.